participants to the 2020 International Youth Day high-level event on youth and sustainable development in Africa. My name is Ezra Yego. I'm a project officer with SDSN Youth at the Africa Regional Office, and I'm based out of Nairobi, Kenya. I'm extremely delighted to be your MC for today and to moderate the panel discussion thereafter that's coming up. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers and panelists that are coming up, and we're here to discuss meaningful youth engagement and the kinds of investments that we need to make as organizations working with and for young people to ensure that we can achieve the Agenda 2030, as well as the AU Agenda 2063 and sustainable development in Africa. Kindly use the chat box below to let us know where you're joining us from. Share with us your name and the city you're joining us from. We're extremely delighted to have you here. SDSN is also inviting you to join us in our conversation on Twitter through the hashtag #EngageYouthForSDGs. So that will be provided also in the chat box. We are really excited to hear you share your thoughts, especially the young people, on how we can better engage young people for the SDGs. As I mentioned earlier, we're extremely delighted to have a large number of young people joining us from across the African continent and all over the globe. So please use the chat box to let us know. So we're going to start now with some high-level remarks from the President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Allow me to mention that Professor Sachs is an exceptional economist and has been at the forefront of actually driving the UN agenda trying to end extreme poverty in the world. Professor Sachs, you're welcome.
Ezra, thank you very much. Thanks to all of SDSN Youth and to all of the members of SDSN Youth across Africa. We count on you. The SDGs can be achieved. Africa can meet all of the goals, but it depends on young people. You have the energy, the skills, the determination, the knowledge of your societies. And so it's really your creativity that counts. And it's our job to support you. And so I'm very, very encouraged by this session today, which is about how young people can meaningfully be engaged in promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not an easy period right now. Because of the COVID pandemic everywhere, the world is in more disarray and more confusion and economic crisis and social crisis than any time that I remember in my career, I think in my lifetime. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that this is the biggest disruption to the world since World War II. And economically, this is also correct. We're just in a tremendous upheaval. So we have to be thinking of the ways out of this crisis, and not only to escape from the crisis itself, but to find a way out that's really going to build our societies and accelerate the movement towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm very eager to hear what the young people have in store and in mind. One area that I'm especially interested in, and I hope some of you are interested in, is how to use the digital technologies in the African context to accelerate progress. One of the things that we have learned during the COVID epidemic is that we've had an acceleration of the trends to online healthcare, telemedicine, education. The very kind of conference that we're having now might have been in person just a few months ago, but now it is online and actually enabling us to have an even bigger discussion than we would have had across continents and bringing us together in a new and different kind of way. I would love to hear, because I'm a big believer in it, ways that young people think that the digital technologies can really lead to breakthroughs and leapfrogging in the African context. I've mentioned some of the applications in the health area, the use of digital applications for controlling COVID itself, or for empowering community health workers, something that I've been engaged in with my wife, Dr. Sonia Sachs, in the Millennium Villages and in other projects. In telemedicine, because now it's possible to have a regular health checkup by distance with a doctor in a city, helping to give coverage to people in countrysides, or to reading x-rays 1,000 miles away, or to monitor a patient from a distance using a smartphone or some smart device. A second big area is education. We know that even without the COVID pandemic, a lot of our education in the future will be online, to connect classrooms, to have young people, even in rural areas, be part of global events, to be able to have more opportunities for young people to meet with their political leaders and so forth through online educational activities. So I would like to see initiatives in education that help especially vulnerable communities where children are not in school, or maybe there's no school nearby, to use e-education or online learning in a more effective way, and ways that we could help to support such activities. A third area that is very, very important, obviously, is e-governance, the use of digital technologies to help people to access government services, to receive transfer payments from government, to have a digital identity that can be used for getting licenses or opening businesses or registering activities. And this is happening, but I think young people know how to do this better than old people, and we need acceleration in this area. Another area where digital is going to play a big role is in bringing electrification to places that don't have it, using smart systems, smart grids for microgrids and mini grids. Kenya has had great success in recent years in accelerating electrification across the country. Some of those practices, I think, can be expanded across Africa. But we have a goal, SDG 7, to have modern energy services for every household in the world by 2030. And that will require using new forms of generation, especially photovoltaics, but also new business models, which will be e-energy services, helping people to pay for energy or access energy through smart systems. And then I would finally add e-jobs. A lot of our jobs in the future are going to be not in an office or at a workplace, but from home. And a lot of activities for new employment of African young people will be in international businesses that may be any place in the world, not necessarily down the block or miles away, but 5,000 miles away. And I think creating new business opportunities or job opportunities for young people to be engaged in the international labor market through online skills is another area where youth engagement can play a very, very big role. So this is just one of several dimensions that we might talk about in accelerating the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's one that, from my point of view, is of special interest for young people, because young people are growing up in the digital world. You know the tools, You use them naturally. You know ideas and new applications that can be brought about. And my belief is that this is going to be the great leapfrogging opportunity for developing countries, because these are powerful technologies that can break isolation and bring even people in distant areas together into the economy or healthcare or education and other areas. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and especially we're seeking to find ways to support your initiatives of SDSN Youth Africa so that we can also help you to mobilize capital, start new activities, start ventures, work with governments, and so on. Caroline Makasa, the Secretary General of the SDG Center for Africa, is with us. That's a core partner institution to be promoting solutions for the SDGs. And I know that Caroline is a big supporter of what you're doing, and the SDG Center is a big supporter of what you're doing as well. So Ezra, thank you for the chance to lead off. Congratulations on organizing today's session. I'm very keen to learn the results and to see how we can help you, and to hear Dr. Diop's ideas from UNECA. I know that she's going to give us some great insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. Thank you for highlighting that. So the young people in the audience, I can see a number of young people are actually sharing with us where they're joining us from. I'm seeing a number of people from Nairobi. We have people from Johannesburg and many more. So Professor Sachs has challenged us, and he'd like to hear how, as young people in Africa, we can actually harness digital technology to accelerate progress in the continent. I like how you mentioned an issue that's very critical here in the African continent. So many young people are facing job insecurity and unemployment. So, and how e-jobs can actually play a key role, and how Africa can play a key role in the international labor markets. And now it's my pleasure to actually invite Mrs. Ngone Diop. She is the director of the Sub-Regional Office for West Africa at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Mrs. Diop is she's a gender expert and an economist. And we're very glad to have you here, Mrs. Diop.
Good afternoon. Thank you very, very much, Diego. Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on your side, your time zone. Thank you, Deco. And very quickly, I like very much the introduction from Professor Lafayette, which is quite consistent with what I'm going to talk about. So Professor Lafayette, President of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and Ambassador Rania Sabatusi, I hope I spell its name properly, from the European Union. I mean, ambassador to the European, to the African Union of the European Union, to the African Union of the European Union, and Mr. Slamak, sorry if I misspell the name, Samloni, the director of the SDSN Youth. Distinguished young people, young women, and young men from across the continent. All participant or delegate, really, I would like to say good afternoon to you. And I would like once more to thank you, Diego, and your team for this invitation. Mine actually is quite a delight to address you this high-level event on youth and sustainable development on behalf of Dr. Vera Songwe, actually, who couldn't make it, the Undersecretary General, and then the Executive Secretary of ECA. Allow me first to thank you all. Thank really the network, because it's a very proactive network that has been doing a lot, sometimes not known, not seen, but it has been doing a lot. It has also started documenting some of the flagship, which actually are quite very useful in scaling up progress toward the achievement of sustainable development goal, and the extent to which the youth could contribute better and stronger. So well done for what you say, but also what you're doing. Thank you also, and congratulations for taking this initiative to organizing the event on the youth and sustainable development in Africa to celebrate the International Youth Day 2020, which theme is a youth engagement for global action on a global action, which is quite very relevant indeed this time, because to us this event during this very global and very unprecedented, I would say, health emergency, which is the pandemic we know, and the socio-economic impact it has, because it has really disrupted nearly all aspects of life, all group of society, and the youth. Young people, we have done work with them. The young people are being on the continent and elsewhere are being hit harder. Why? Because especially of the vulnerable situation they are in. But also there are some opportunity for them to contribute better. And I would like, therefore, given the unprecedented crisis inherent in this COVID-19 and the unprecedented economic crisis we are in, just to try to understand the kind of effort that has been done and could be done to achieve SDG. We shouldn't lose sight that yes, there are some emergency, there are some immediate needs to actually tackling COVID-19, to responding to the humanitarian crisis and so on. But there is need to link it with the imperative of accelerating intervention measures toward achieving the SDG, and especially the Decade for Action that actually has been launched by our Secretary General last September. So it is important also in so doing to really bring to bear the challenges facing the youth, but more importantly, their potential to contributing to accelerating the achievement of Agenda 2030 of the SDG. Accelerating because we do know we are not doing well when it comes to implementing the SDG. We do know there was some kind of very complex and variation across the continent. Some countries or some regions are doing much better than others. And overall, before COVID, let's say in December 2019, early December, we were actually estimating that overall Africa was at 37% of implementation of the SDG. It means we were many countries which were lacking behind, including in my region, West Africa, actually impeded the overall, let's say, score of the continent when it comes to scaling to achieving SDGs. So, which has been made even harder with the COVID-19. But indeed, COVID-19 has negative impact on all of us. It has negative impact on all countries, on all the region, be it West Africa, be it Southern Africa. We found in ECA study that all of them have been hardy, but more importantly, because this is the subject today, it is being very hard for all countries to really implement the 17 SDG. Many countries have been dropping, let's say, or reducing their effort to implementing SDG because of the reduction of their fiscal space related to the low economic growth, and also with combined with the decline in the prices of most commodities, including oil. It has impacted hard, really, the effort and the process, the trajectory toward accelerating the implementation of SDG. And in so doing, we found that the youth has been at the forefront, not only to responding to the pandemic, but they are at the forefront in the conversation we were having, including in June, to really thinking the kind of debate and the paradigm shift you have to actually bring to the center more forcefully achievement of SDG, the decade of action, the imperative of the decade of action, into the narrative and the discussion of building back our economies and social fabric better. How do we do it? By harnessing the potential, the youth potential, the commitment, but also the unique innovation solution that the youth are bringing. And indeed, they are playing critical pivotal role. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, also young people on the continent, young women and men, estimated to be going to represent 24% of the population of our continent. And this share increased to 37% when we consider the age group between 15 and 30. And by 2050, there will be more than 4 million young African, and between 15 and 24, nearly the double today, which means there are some kind of important policy implication related to that. But there are also important potential and contribution, because I would like us to mainly focus on the opportunities that are meaningful, that are actually related to that big number. And African young women and women, we have to say it and remember, have been showing the pivotal role they are playing on the continent wealth creation, inclusive economic growth, and indeed sustainable development. Many youth from Kenya, from Senegal, in their community, they're actually implementing sustainable development related program. We come to goal 1, which is poverty, but also all the goal, including employment and so on and so forth. So yet, from across the continent, the youth are contributing to tackling the community poverty in their community. They're also contributing to economic growth through innovation, innovative local production. You can name it in Ghana, you can name it in Nigeria. It's sometimes in a very, let's say, remote area. They're actually doing that. And they're also providing greater innovation and solution, and which has been scaling up during COVID. And I think the first speaker mentioned it. Very quickly, we found that in June 17, when we brought them together, we found that from Accra, Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, the youth are actually involved in creating solutions, very innovative. When it comes to local products related to the production of kits, when it comes to energy, solar energy, that help to actually dry the hand, and then that also some local product, alcoholic local product that help to disinfect hospital, community hospital, and so on and so forth. The youth are at the forefront. We found that in some rural area in Uganda, in some rural area in Zambia, Malawi, the youth are actually there to communicate the right information when it comes to COVID. But in the meantime, there are some youth who are engaged in supporting their government to actually bringing the decade of action. Some of the youth, they are not many, and we are trying to help them to really ensuring that we don't lose sight of the imperative of building back better, but the imperative of accelerating action toward accelerating implementation and meeting the SDG on the continent. Some of them actually from Lesotho, South Africa, they were actually investing with the African Union in also implementing at the same time Agenda 2063, the aspiration of the continent. So overall, the youth are actually there, and they are critical to actually ensuring that decade of action, the imperative of mobilizing, the imperative of partnership, and the imperative of ambition, which are the three imperatives of the decade of action to accelerating achievement of SDG, are actually at the center of that. They are doing their bit. So African youth and women are indeed, by all means, agents for change and drivers of the continent's structural transformation and sustainable development, from what I have said, a success story. If Africa can provide its young people with the education, professional education, skills they need, and sufficient and stable productive employment opportunities, the youth actually could become a significant source for the rising global consumption and production within the implementation of our African free trade areas. For instance, at ECA, we have estimated that by positioning the youth to be productive, the continent potential GDP will reach $78 billion per year, just by positioning them and by ensuring they actually have access to the opportunities. This is to say they are critical to achieving sustainable development. This is to say they are critical to really achieving inclusive development, leaving no one behind. That is the promise of sustainable development. Distinguished participants, distinguished also colleagues from the UN and the youth, unfortunately, we know that the trend we are going in, because of COVID, we're losing sight on the economic front, but we're losing sight on the social side. Because the COVID-19 has started to impede economic gain in growth an effort made to integrate youth into Africa productive labor force with implication, very high implication on SDG, but also Agenda 2030, but also Agenda 2063. African governments were already battling with shortfall in facing challenge with the shortfall in employment of the youth, where only an estimate of 3 million jobs were created for 10 to 12 million youth that are actually entering each year in the employment market. This has been exacerbated. And of course, we have been seeing many youth who actually are losing the productive, moving from the productive employment sector to the unproductive employment sector, which actually is an area of concern. So a study by ECA also has suggested that because of the pandemic right now, up to 29 million could be pushed into extreme poverty, and the youth will be actually the majority of this because of the very, very difficult economic situation they are in already. 19 million jobs could be lost as workforce face full or partial workplace closure. And the young people, mostly depending on rather widespread informal and SMEs, will be the most affected. Ladies and gentlemen, very quickly, I think we also know that related to that is the ability of the youth to really be able to continue contributing and be the agent of change when it comes to turning the Agenda 2030 into reality, a promise that everybody can feel, a promise that everybody can really live in, including the youth. But also when we know that that is so can only be possible if the youth continue to get the kind of education, the very high level education they need to be able to get the kind of human capital and the accumulation they have to really respond to the challenges related to the SDGs, because 17 SDGs means they are interrelated, but it means also there are specific kind of intervention that are needed. The youth, unfortunately, are still having those challenges, but one of the things that are being made so and they are being used are the TIC and of course innovative technology, as the speaker said, access to internet and so on. And for this we can say that 120 million people here on the continent have the phone, but they also have the challenges of using it properly to contribute to the change I was mentioning it, but also contribute fully to all implementation of all the goals. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to say also we have, although we have a lot of challenges related to this situation, we also have a critical moment of opportunity that are really linked with this crisis. Samuelson has told us, and as economists, we can remember that, you know, you can have a crisis, but the crisis can be also a destructive production. So because of the crisis, we have found that there are some very imperative and there are some very potential that lies with the youth, which we can unlock. And I would like to share with you the following key messages and policy recommendations that are needed to not only tackle the many challenges youth are actually facing in contributing fully and being part and parcel of this agenda of the implementation of the agenda of change, that is the sustainable development, but also contributed more and more to building back better our continent. The first one, based on the analysis we did, and some of this I hide with you, it is extremely urgent for African continent to invest in harnessing the demographic dividend. When we talk about the youth and when we talk about changing the structure of the continent, when we talk about ensuring that the continent achieves sustainable development, you cannot do it unless you invest in the 4 pillars of demographic dividend. And in doing so, African member states should really invest on education, as we say, on health, on productive employment, and also open and accountable governance, bringing the youth at the table, bringing the youth, ensuring that the voice of the youth, their agency matter in policy making, but also unlocking the demo economic for development of the continent, which means the life cycle deficit that we are seeing now because of the kind of structure of the population we have. There is a need to turn that life cycle into a more productive and more healthy population that can really be able to contribute to achieving the SDG. And in so doing, it is also important, which is the second point, to bringing the youth at the table. And we know that they actually have to what to say. They have some agency, powerful agency to make change. They have a critical contribution they have made. By bringing the youth at the table, we'll be able to do at least two things. We'll be able to ensuring that the very ingredient that is need of policy making decision, but also of measures of intervention will not leave them behind. We'll be able also to ensuring that the need of the community, because as I said, we have the proof that they work with the community, and through that they contribute to implementing the SDG. They contribute to achieving to eradication of poverty. They contribute to the health and so on. So by bringing them at the table, but I'm believing in them, by enhancing their capability and capacity to really change the narrative and to bring their contribution in a meaningful way across the implementation of the SDG, will be able to change actually and accelerate the progress we are feeling now, which is being hit harder by the COVID pandemic. But doing so is so important by trying to scaling up the innovation. As I said, we have compiled many case study and success story from Ghana, Senegal, from Uganda, from Nigeria, of specific and unique innovation when it comes to solar testing, but it comes to kids, when it comes to digital health system and so on and so forth, where the youth brought their contribution. So how can a government can actually identify them? How government can invest and scale them up? With the youth being at the center is critical. And in so doing, it's not only the youth, Minister of Youth, because it is a sector-wide approach. All ministers, meaning Minister of Finance and Economy, should be part of the game. But also related to that, to me, is to really scale up the resources that are being allocated to youth program. Right now, we found a decline in the resources, again, because of the kind of fiscal space we have, which is being completely stricken. So how do we bring a government, Minister of Finance, and the youth on the table to really have the conversation around the resources and to be able to support their contribution to scaling up is the criticism. And I think last but not least is better governance, transparency, accountability, and a governance system that actually is inclusive of youth voice and youth participation is a condition sine qua non to unlocking the youth potential of young women, the youth potential of young men across the continent. I believe if we do those imperatives, which is the imperative of inclusiveness, the imperative of ambition, the imperative of empowering the youth, and the imperative of scaling up their innovation, their solution, their ability and capability, we will be able to bring in the SDG into the policy debate that we have in. More importantly, many countries are right now repurposing and reprioritizing their long-term development plan, their medium-term development plan, which is actually 5 years development plan. This is an opportunity for all of us, for the youth to engage with our support, United Nations, with the support of other international development, to actually bringing their motivation, bringing their constraint, bringing their need that I call their coins into the picture that will lead to changing the dynamic and changing the kind of decision making and measures. So achieving SDG to me and to ECA is still possible despite the very negative impact of the pandemic. And we strongly believe that the youth are critical to making the promise of Agenda 2030 a reality on the continent, and we know that they have already proven their ability to do so. We at the United Nations Economic Commission, we strongly believe in the capacity of the youth, and all our programs actually are articulated into harnessing the population ability with the youth potential being put at the center of the decision making, at the center of our programming. We believe that if we really join forces and give the voice and abilities and the measure and what it takes for the youth to be empowered in a very holistic manner, when they can really scale up their current contribution in a meaningful way to harnessing and hastening the acceleration of Agenda 2030, and in so doing, they will contribute to really accelerating the implementation of Agenda 2063 of in the continent. So I believe it's possible, and I would like to leave you with by reiterating ECA renewed commitment to supporting SDN youth and to supporting all the youth communities. We're having a program that we'll be launching soon, which we call our Big Ticket, and we'll be reaching out to give you more insight into the program and more insight into how concretely we would like to support you to really bringing your stone in building back better the continent by achieving sustainable development goals. Thank you very, very much for this.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Diop. Thank you for reiterating what the Agenda 2030 calls for, which is for us to no longer work in silos. Thank you, and we're really grateful for the commitment that ECA has shared with us. Your commitment towards unlocking the potential of young people and working with young people to mobilize and in partnership. So as SDSN Youth, we look forward to engaging with you. Share our deep appreciation to Mrs. Songwe for allowing ECA to be one of our partners in this and for being part of this webinar. We're really grateful. So moving on, we now have a video message from Ms. Aya Chebi. Ms. Aya Chebi is the African Union Secretary, African Union Youth Envoy. And she couldn't make it for this event because of an ongoing event, but she did send a video message.
Hello, African youth and global youth, and happy International Youth Day. From the virtual AU Youth Consultation Series on COVID-19, we listened to young people expressing how COVID-19 pandemic revealed and exacerbated existing global
sorry for that technical hitch.
This is our day. Hello, African youth and global youth, and happy International Youth Day. From the virtual AU Youth Consultation Series on COVID-19, we listened to young people expressing how COVID-19 pandemic revealed and exacerbated existing global inequalities, from digital divide to youth unemployment and gender-based violence and many other forms of injustice. This is our day to bring up front and central all these issues to the global community. This is the day where we remind our leaders of young people's potential, bold, radical voices, agency, activism, and impact. Today, we also hold our leaders accountable to the progressive policy, the Agenda 2063, and the Agenda 2030. I also call on all global leaders to institutionalize intergenerational co-leadership and dialogues that can stimulate solidarity, build trust and learning across all generations, and to silence the guns, because silencing the guns is also about silencing corruption, silencing climate crisis, silencing poverty, silencing youth unemployment, and silencing gender-based violence. Now, to my fellow young people in Africa and the diaspora and the world, find your power and use it. We have so many superpowers. Our demographic power, our digital power, our mobilization power, our voting power, our innovation power, and our youth-led accountability power. We are the most interconnected, better educated, the coolest and most resilient generation. So let's take that power and be the custodians of our own development. Let's take charge of our own future. As we celebrate today, let us elevate and amplify and support the most vulnerable and marginalized youth in our communities. And again, happy International Youth Day.
Thank you so much for that. That was Ms. Aya Chibi, the AU Youth Envoy. And that was a big challenge for us as young people in the African continent to actually go out there and demand for intergenerational co-leadership. We'll now move on swiftly to a panel discussion, and I'm really happy to have our panelists here with us. We have a diverse panel who are going to we're going to have a conversation and debunk the whole conversation on youth engagement, meaningful youth engagement in the African continent, and the kind of investments that need to be made to ensure that actually our young people, we the young people are actually engaged and we are at the forefront of change in the African continent. So our first panelist is Dr. Jackie Chimanzi. Dr. Chimanzi is the CEO of the Africa Leadership Institute and is at the forefront of actually empowering young people, young leaders in Africa to actually drive development in Africa. Our second panelist is Ms. Caroline Makasa. Ms. Caroline Makasa is the acting director of the SDG Center for Africa. She previously served as a business and private sector advisor at the SDG Center for Africa. Our third panelist is Mr. Eric Nkizingabo. Eric is a senior advisor for Africa at SDSN Youth, and he leads a team that drives the African strategy here at SDSN Youth Africa. And we're glad to have you, Mr. Nkizingabo. And finally, our panelist who couldn't join us but did send a video message, which we're going to watch later on, is Ms. Nisren El Saim. She is the chairperson of the Sudan Youth Organization on Climate Change and has recently been appointed by the UN Secretary General to join his Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, and is a junior negotiator at the Africa Group of Negotiators. So moving on swiftly, we're first going to have Ms. Caroline Masaka. Caroline, it's great to have you here, and we're really looking forward to having a meaningful conversation with you. Ms. Masaka, Aspiration 6 of the Agenda 2063, the Africa that we want. It really emphasizes what development, we want an Africa where development is people-driven, where we can actually rely on the potential that is offered by the African people. So, Ms. Masaka, how can we build an Africa that is people-driven, relying on the potential of its people? And we have a situation where institutions are really relying on Western experts. So our young people have the potential. How can we ensure that we actually tap into the potential of these young people to actually build our institutions and governments?
Thank you. Firstly, I want to start with the fact that the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, that's what STEM stands for. And a lot of educational curriculums in Africa actually are based on memorization. So you'll find that youth are not really practical, or cannot really be practical, because a lot of the laboratories, for example, they are there in name, but lack equipment, sometimes lack reagents. I mean, there are quite a lot of, I think, impediments in the educational setup and the system because of the fact that it's not practical. Students memorize and then they go and write an exam. Then after that, they have to apply to go into university, but it's not applied learning or practical learning that actually prepares them for the real world. And so you find that as a result of this, we have to rely on Western experts and also experts from Asia as well. So I think there have to be reforms in the educational system and better training of teachers. That is also one thing. But also earlier on, a speaker had talked about the digital age. One of the barriers to the digital age is actually access. The cost of using the internet is actually a barrier because it's very expensive. Just the cost of bandwidth is very expensive for most people, and they actually can't afford, as a result, to use the internet. So there are many people who are actually left behind, and even some youth, because of the fact that they cannot use the internet. But the internet offers a world of opportunity because you can be anywhere. I mean, we have about 60% of the African population that is actually under the age of 25. I mean, that's a huge market. exceptionally huge market to tap into. But this market also has limitations because of lack of access to the internet, because it's very expensive. But among the factors that makes internet expensive is actually that there's some monopoly in the industry, and there are not a lot of players. And this is why you find that also there are very few service providers, and many governments in Africa have not invested adequately in technology. And so even that lack of appreciation of technology, I think, also creates a barrier. And that's why, we have limitations with what youth can do. Not to understate the fact that youth are not important. They are very important. And we actually have very talented youth out there. So this is one of the reasons. But also, when you look at, for example, in the trade sector, you find that a lot of government procurement actually doesn't target the youth. You look at a lot of the policies that are in place, and some of them don't really recognize the role that youth can play in government procurement. And a lot of them run small businesses, but they're not really able to have that access. So a lot more needs to be done to involve youths, to improve policy so that youths can actually play a role. But also there are other aspects, such as the fact that a lot of them don't have collateral. But I think that there are things that can be done to bridge collateral. And some countries are beginning to do that, like by offering facilities where youths can be able to trade, so that over a period of time, that group of youths increases their profits, and that they actually become bankable, because that is also another problem, is lack of access to credit and finance. The other thing is the fact that there are also, there's lack of vocational training, or maybe not enough reform in vocational training. Sometimes there's a disconnect between what vocational training institutes are offering and also what is actually on the market. And so you find that some of them, they can't be employed. So maybe you have to get an expat to come and do certain things. For example, I'll give you an example in Zambia. In the mining sector, some things, you have to have experts. You have to have experts to come and perform certain things or come and do certain aspects of the mining process, because of the fact that you just cannot find the skills, the right skills, maybe that would be the right word. Another thing is that you look at many governments, there's what we call youth service. In some countries, it's called national youth service. They have different terms for it. Some even call it national community service. But in Africa, most of this is militarized. And, yes, it's important to have security for a country, but at the same time, there's no focus on maybe a national industrial youth service. Maybe that also looks at other sectors like maybe agriculture, depending on the particular country. So year in, year out, governments churn out a lot of these youths, but they're not giving them the practical skills for the real world. So maybe there needs to be a shift in terms of also this, youth service, which is militarized, and it needs to become more practical. We need to look at industry, for example. I mean, if we could manufacture our own products, it means, we can create a huge market, but we are importing products. But at the same time, also is the fact that we are not using opportunities, I think, as African governments to leverage for technology. We can exchange technology because we have resources, and I think we should be doing that instead of just looking at figures in terms of exports and imports, pounds, dollars, euros. But we need technology, because if you have technology, you can be able to produce things. For example, in some countries, even basic things cannot be produced. Basic essential commodities have to be imported. For example, a basic soap that someone could make or countries can make, because this is just some chemicals put together, this soap comes from somewhere else. I mean, we have to create jobs. And I think until we really have, I think, a lot more effort being put in the area of technology and investment, I think then, youths are actually going to lag behind. We will still be relying on China, for example. I'll give you another example. Just look at chairs, tables. Many countries in Africa have wood. But what is happening to the wood? A lot of it is actually being illegally exported, but that is another story. But even what is available, governments are not procuring from, from their own traders. They're not procuring from small SMEs, small medium enterprises. They prefer to buy a table from China, but a lot of the times this table from China is made out of chipboard, not even real wood. I've actually had an experience, because my background is actually more of trade, investment, and business. I've been to many places on the ground and visited even plantations where some of this wood comes from. Really high quality timber, but we are importing. So, it makes me wonder, we need to really have a practical, focused approach to really, working to get youths employed. Because where else would the employment come from? Apart from technology, but we cannot wait for that, just because we need to also invest. We need to use what we have and to begin to move forward and give youths a livelihood. And not where we have to keep importing everything, even the basic table, basic chair, basic nurses' uniform. You can imagine in some countries, they grow cotton. I mean, from cotton, that's what you get, they grow cotton, but the cotton is exported raw. Even to make a nurse's, they can't procure even nurses' uniforms from local companies. They are procuring nurses' uniforms from China. Where are people going to work? But we have many tailors, we have many designers. They are there in the markets, but the market is limited. So I feel that governments need to play a greater role, so that our youths, I think most of our youths are, they are energetic, they are willing to do things. I think anybody wants to have a job and, make a living, but governments need to do more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Makasa, for sharing with us these bottlenecks that are actually preventing the African continent from tapping into our potential. And actually the reforms that need to be done in the education sector and harnessing the digital age in the continent. So, Dr. Chimanzi, over the past decade, Africa has truly changed. We've shifted from being called the hopeless continent, and now we are Africa Rising. And I know this is something you're really deeply passionate about. With the demographic boom that Africa is facing, what kind of policies and programs do we really need to prepare our young Africans, not only for leadership roles, but also to just involve them in the transformation of Africa? I know you've just launched an amazing report today that I know you're going to highlight in as you talk to us. So yeah, basically just let us know what kind of policies and programs do you think we need in Africa?
Okay, thank you very much, Ezra, and thanks to everybody watching. Today is a really important day, in International Youth Day, but I think it's even more significant for Africa, just given the specifics about Africa. As you all know, Africa's got a very unique demographic profile. It's the youngest continent, but it's also the one where young people are not at the table. And I don't think that's acceptable, and I don't think that should continue. So how does a continent with the most young people also have the most young people who are not involved in governance? So I think what I am proposing this International Africa Day is that Africans need to start harnessing the energy, the curiosity, the innovativeness of young people to help develop solutions to some of Africa's most pressing challenges. So I think then the question becomes, what are those platforms that would bring young Africans to the center? So as you all know, young Africans are doing remarkable things, through innovation. They're disrupting different spaces. They're disrupting education and healthcare and agriculture. Sometimes they're developing apps, but they're using all their energies to disrupt and bring solutions. But how do we bring that energy to the center, to policy making? Because I think if policies are not right at the center, everything else cannot be right. So I think for me that's the question that I was trying to answer with the report that we've launched. How do we bring young people to the center of governance so they help co-create the kinds of policies and solutions that we need? Ezra?
So I'm just going to allow you now maybe 5 minutes just to briefly take us through this report, this amazing report that you've just launched.
Okay, great. Okay. So like I've said, I want to see more young Africans playing at the center And I've explained why the center is important, because at the center, that's where policies are created. And if policies are not right, everything else cannot be right. You can't have the enabling environment for entrepreneurs, for example, if the policy framework is wrong. So that's why I think young people have a greater role to play at the center. Do you want to continue? So what we did with this report that we launched today is we explored some of the ways that young people can be brought to the center. You can continue. Yeah, we've talked about the demographic profile. We've talked about the governance gap. So it is the youngest continent, but it's also the one with the oldest leaders. So that governance gap is very huge and it needs to come down. And the only way it can come down is by having more young people in governance. Thanks, Ezra. You can, okay. So obviously the key issue here is that this supply-demand equation is very lopsided. So we've got an oversupply of brilliant young people, but we don't have enough institutions where they can enter, or rather we don't have enough structures that have been put into place to absorb all these young people. So the point of this report is to say, how do we generate demand rather? So the supply is there, but the demand is not there. So how do we stimulate the demand? Ezra, do you want to go on? Okay. So we looked at a number of case studies from across the African continent, and these were the themes that we explored in the report. So the first one relates to lowering political and economic barriers to formal political participation. So this is for young people who actually want to contest elections and enter the political arena. So we're suggesting the lowering of age barriers, for example. So you will know that the Not Too Young to Run movement in Nigeria has resulted in the age of contesting for political positions being lowered. So we're encouraging other countries to do the same. The second one is fostering intergenerational learning in the public service. So this would be things like, So this would be suggestions like internships, for example, as they have in Rwanda and in Kenya. So after young people graduate from university, can we have internship programs whereby young people can begin to enter the world of work and also to begin to understand how governance works? So this is actually this is a quick win. It doesn't take much, it just requires political will. The third one is formalizing roles for independent young technocrats. So we took this idea from Namibia and Nigeria, where they have special advisors or special assistants. So these are young people that are considered to be experts in their field, and they are brought in to government. So this is a nice pathway for bringing young people into government and for them to make a contribution without necessarily being politicians. And the last one is civic engagement. We looked at the case of Morocco, whereby they have a parallel government of young people working alongside the main government. So it's almost like a parallel structure that works in tandem. Thanks, Ezra. So over and above the specific case studies and the specific learnings from the case studies, this is just a summary of what we would say are the policy recommendations that we are making. The first one. Yes, so the first one is really in all that we do to adopt this intergenerational and co-leadership approach. So just to understand that we need to start preparing young people to inherit the current institutions. So the sooner we bring them in, the sooner they start working alongside current leaders, the better for everybody. So we need experience, but we also need new ideas at the same time. So we're not advocating for a complete takeover, we're just advocating for co-leadership. And I think this bodes well for sustainability as well. Thank you. Okay, the second one we've already talked. Yes, you can move on. The second one we've talked about, lowering the age requirements for contesting electoral positions, as has been recently done in Nigeria. And we see that the Nigerian example is already yielding results. So in their last election, they had a number of young people who contested, which wasn't the case before. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, you can move on, Ezra. Okay, and linked to that is also lowering the fees that one needs to pay in order to contest in an election. So one of the findings in Nigeria was that the candidacy fees were very high, and this precluded a lot of young people from being able to contest elections. You can move on. This is another one. Sometimes it's a controversial one to introduce youth quotas. And one of the arguments against this sometimes is that if you have a youth quota, or like with any quota system, you sometimes don't attract the best. But I think we hear that argument, but we are saying that it's important also to have a system in place that forces institutions to actually employ young people, because then otherwise it just won't happen. So yes, youth quotas may have their issues, they may not work perfectly, but we think it's a good start. In the same way that you have quotas for gender, right? Rwanda's got a gender quota, and as a result, Rwanda's parliament is the most gender balanced in the world, in fact. The youth internship program, I've already spoken about, you can move on, but we see this as a cost-effective way to start to introduce young people to the world of work. This one, we've spoken about sort of young technocrats. It's a nice pathway to bring in young people with expertise and certain skill sets to work in government at the highest level without necessarily being a politician, because how else would you enter government? So Nigeria has done this very well. They've got young people coming in from Harvard, Oxford, MIT, leaving really good jobs in Wall Street to come back to Nigeria to serve. So it's a really good example to look at. And number 7 speaks to the Moroccan example I talked about, the parallel youth structures. Yeah, so these are just governance structures, but that really have young people running them as a way of shadowing the proper government, as a way of learning. And so next one. I think this is the last one now. But I think more importantly, what we're saying is that these reforms need to be institutionalized. So they're not dependent on any one particular head of state or any particular government. So the sooner we institutionalize and these become entrenched, the better it is for everybody. So this recommendation cuts across all the recommendations we made, that they need to be institutionalized and not reliant on political will of any one particular person. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chimanzi. We'll move on to Eric. Dr. Chimanzi has rightly put it out how there's an urgent need for young people to actually be involved in governance. We had Ms. Makasa talking about a youth involvement in business. And, all this is basically young people being involved in decision making. So what are the small steps that should be taken to see more young people involved in critical decision making in light with the Agenda 2063?
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you for everyone who made sure they give us wisdom. First of all, I would start with having a cause. Everything that young people are trying to do right now is, I would say they're not so sure of the cause they're trying to fight for. You see, if I say cause, I would say a passion for something, what makes us awake the whole night thinking about issues that we want to change, either corruption, we need to have a cause. And then from the cause, now we start going on to building competency, you see, because you can have competency for things that you're not passionate about. So by competency, I mean digging deep, building knowledge, learning from these people, going to universities, practical skills like the ones previous speakers have been mentioning, which I really think is really crucial, because we can keep on brainstorming about things that we're not so sure about. You see, people have less time to give us. Let's say if you go into a meeting and you're about to meet someone who is so important, they will just not give you the time that you really want. So you need to be so exact, so precise about what you're talking about. And from competency, now we move to confidence, which is also, I think, it's a very critical issue for young people right now. And I would really like to also say that I have to blame the old generation, because they don't allow us to make mistakes, because from mistakes, that's where we can gain the confidence that we want. You see, they keep on spoon feeding us. They think we are not yet mature to take up these big positions, not even big positions, but also these big responsibilities, you see? And so there are many different ways and small steps to engage young people towards, this sustainable development journey. But those three ones are really crucial. We need to have a cause, and we need to know what we are doing and what we are doing it for. And also we need to build competency. We need to be expert in one subject matter, either irrigation, something else. Like, we need to build competency, and then we need to have confidence. And with that confidence, I think that we can also start having some platforms to start building on, like SDSN Youth or any other youth organization, which I really think are going to help us to move forward with this agenda. Thank you, Ezra.
Thank you, Eric, for highlighting something that's really important, something that's going on in the continent, where as much as there's this conversation of actually empowering young people to be in roles of decision making, we have some adults who are very uncomfortable with young people filling these traditional roles. So that's an amazing way of approaching the small steps that need to be taken to ensure that we have young people in these decision making roles. We'll just move on swiftly to the closing panel question. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Chimanzi. We've talked about the demographic boom and how it's really presenting an enormous opportunity for us to transform the economic and social outcomes in line with the SDGs and the AU aspirations. And actually, the key objective of this meeting is actually for us to discuss what kind of investments that need to be made to ensure that these African youths actually apply their creativity and problem-solving power in order to transform the continent.
It's a very good question, and I always hear this point about we need to invest more in capacitating, capacity building. And my view is that we've invested enough already. We have amazing young people. What are we doing with them? So we seem to be obsessed with every conference is about how to empower young people, how to invest in them, capacity building, and this and this. We've done that. So the ones we have already that have been trained, that have been capacitated, what are we doing with them? So for me, that's a starting point. It's not to keep throwing more money at them. They're there, they have the capacity, they have the skills. How are you leveraging those skills? You talk about a demographic dividend, but it can only be a dividend if they are meaningfully contributing. So my view is not to throw more money at them, is to open up the spaces, to invite them in so that they can contribute, you know what I mean? So I think it's a very different way of looking at it, yeah.
Yes, I agree with you that a lot of investments have been made in actually building that generation. But now we have a new generation that's coming up, the Generation Z. So I happen to belong to that generation. So a lot of money has been thrown into the millennials. They've gone through various, fellowships. They've actually been empowered. So what kind of sort of changes can be made in terms of invested? Sent an email, so I responded to that. Dr. Chimanzi, you can hear me? Okay, so it seems we've lost Dr. Chimanzi as well. Apologies for that technical hitch. we'll just move on swiftly with the same question about the kind of investments that need to be made to continue engaging our young people. Dr. Chimanzi made a statement talking about we need to stop throwing money and we need to keep empowering the generation that is already there. I'll pose the question now to Eric.
I mean, it's really simple. Like what I've said before, we also have to know exactly that it's not an issue of money this time, because like they say, like if you're given so many things, they expect also many things from you. This time I've changed the mindset about financing, but now looking at how to build strong structure to actually support the financing that we're looking for. Instead of actually young people keeping on saying, we need money, are they really strong to support the money they are fundraising for in terms of programs? Are they consistent in what they're doing? So we need to actually not be the ones to keep on pointing fingers to the old generation, to these big organizations, but also looking at ourselves, like what we are doing, what we are building, that is going to last. Because if something I know about this financing world is people need to be sure of of what they're spending their money on. It's not just lobbying and asking for money, but it's just a strong cause and a sustainable cause, which is why I believe in what we're doing at SDSN Youth, because it has a purpose and it has a very long term effect on programs. So thank you, Ezra, for the question.
Thank you, Eric. I don't know whether Dr. Chimanzi is back with us, but I would just have loved to finish up the conversation with her. Dr. Chimanzi? Okay, it seems we lost Dr. Chimanzi. Thank you so much for that, Eric. So I think we'll now move on to listen to Ms. Nisreen El Saim, the UN Youth Climate Envoy, her statement on investment for youth.
Hello everyone, I'm very glad to be here with you today. Happy International Youth Day. My name is Nisreen El Saim. I'm from Sudan. I'm chairing Sudan Youth Organization on Climate Change, as I also been chosen recently to be member in the UN Secretary General Advisory Group, Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Well, we will need to develop ourselves, we need to develop Africa, but we also need to take climate change and other environmental impacts into the consideration. So any kind of investment, business, or development mechanism should be mainly green and sustainable. Young Africans are the most affected and impacted by climate change, because we know that the massive and the huge impacts of climate change and the ugly face of climate change will only occur in the future. The future that us, the young Africans, will need to take care of and we will need to deal with. So we must make sure that first of all, young Africans know how to adapt with climate change, have the right capabilities and abilities to do that. So capacity building is very important and essential for climate adaptation. Also, any kind of investment, creating jobs, green economy must be taken to the maximum. Renewable energy is a very promising field. It creates a lot of jobs. It also gives us a clean and sustainable way to create energy that we can use for our development. Other techniques like climate smart agriculture, agribusiness, and other supply chain markets are very reliable and also very green. Let's not forget the research and the innovation. I know that young Africans are having a very high abilities, very smart, and they have a very unique solving problem capabilities. We need to dedicate all of this and also put it in one track in order to solve the problem of the emissions of the CO2 is not the end of the story. We also need to make sure that any kind of investment for research will go directly to the good of the young people and also for the planet. So why not to invest in science, innovation, technology that will make our life better, but will also help us to save the planet. Last but not least, we should also think about water harvesting techniques. We should also think about different kind of issues and technologies that will make our lives better, yet will help us to save the planet. Thank you very much.
Amazing remarks there from Ms. El Taim. She couldn't join us today because of an ongoing meeting with the Secretary General. She's really highlighted how an issue that most of us here in Africa really don't see as a serious matter, which is climate change and environmental sustainability and the kinds of investments that need to be made there. Ms. Makasa, sorry, we're winding up the conversation on with just basically what kind of investments need to be made.
Okay, I can't seem to get my the webcam on again. Okay. I think there needs to be investment in creating, first of all, opportunities, but also investing firstly, I think, in the in infrastructure, so that bandwidth becomes affordable, so that even youths can take more opportunities. I think in businesses in the digital age, you know, there's a lot going on, and I think with this huge population that we have, these are opportunities that can definitely be created. But also reforms in government procurement to give opportunity to youths. There can be quotas, but there has to be something that can be done for them, because I think I tend to concur with earlier on with the speaker. I would say that a lot of trainings have been done. So there are some who are quite well skilled, but no opportunity. So I think that is one way. There has to be some type of opportunity for them, you know, to be able to also participate in the economy, because that is also part of decision making. Then also, I think that there needs to be some type of reforms also in not only a militarized youth service, but an industrial youth service to serve particular niches, because then this will also create market opportunities. And I think that there needs to be investment in this so that more employment can actually be created. At the same time, you know, there are some technologies out there, some local technologies that have been developed by some very innovative youths. These need to be documented, you know, and better awareness of patents, trademarks, and intellectual property, but also more investment in vocational training. The trainers, that is, need better training. You know, there needs to be more. I think Africa's relationship with China must change. It shouldn't be one where we only expect to make, you know, to have foreign currency imports and exports, but I think it should be one where there should be technology exchange, so that, you know, we can also be able to, you know, also have youths that can also make products that have demand, not only in Africa or in their own countries, but also internationally as well.
Thank you, Ms. Maka. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Just to sum up this whole conversation and on everything that's been mentioned, the kind of investments that need to be done, building up the generation that has already been really empowered, and the opportunities that need to be provided for them to actually meaningfully build Africa, and the whole youth engagement. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Sam Loney, who's the director of SDSN Youth. He leads the whole SDSN Youth movement, which is in several countries across the globe. Mr. Loney, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ezra. Thank you for organizing this incredible event on International Youth Day, an incredibly important day in a very, very important year. And thank you for putting all this effort, because this conversation is an incredibly important one, and I'm glad we were able to have it. Friends, excellencies, I thank you all for the incredible insights that you've been able to provide. It has certainly been quite enlightening for me, as I've been able to better understand the challenges and opportunities that exist within Africa, in particular for young people. So it has been an event with lots of brilliant ideas and both posing the challenges, but also inspiring transformation. We heard from Professor Sachs about the challenge of digitization and the opportunity it presents. From Madam Diop about highlighting the challenges that young people have been facing, but also in terms of development for the entire continent, but also the incredible contributions for many different countries that young leaders have been making. We heard from the African Youth Envoy, Ms. Shebi, about calling for more progressive policy, and that certainly is a very important call. And also for that policy to be progressive, but also intergenerational. We heard from Dr. Chimanzi about bringing young people into the center and how that can help transform policymaking, which is another incredibly important transformation that is needed, the process of governance and how young people fit into that. And we heard about Ms. Makasa about the importance of reforming the education sector and how providing practical education and being able to actually support young people to move into official employment, but also into the transformation and taking on the challenges of the continent. We heard from Eric about the importance of building confidence and allowing young people to make mistakes. And again, incredibly important because as Sir Ken Robinson famously says, if you're not afraid to be wrong, you'll never come up with something original. And here we need bold and original ideas that can take us forward. And finally, we heard from Ms. Olsaim about the importance of climate change and the challenges it poses and the vulnerabilities of many countries within Africa who will be facing this challenge. And let's not forget the context. About 3/4 of the population of Africa is under the age of 35. And I've had the honor of working with incredible young leaders, such as Eric and Ezra, and many others, including like Aya and Naseem, and also the incredible leaders that we heard from today. I can say that we've seen some incredible initiatives, some incredible creativity, and it shows that the brilliant capacity that young leaders in Africa have for transformation. But I think what they're lacking, and we know this from various surveys and interactions that we've had, what they lack is more or less been pointed out, which is in some cases training and skills development, but in some cases actual opportunity to move into positions of influence and be able to shape the future that they want. So the mission of SDSN Youth in Africa is quite simple, which is how can we support young people with these various challenges? We cannot do everything, but we can do whatever we can within our capacity to support young people. So for us, it is a very simple model, which is recruit young leaders, young volunteers from different parts of the continent, give them the training, the tools and networks, and let them themselves solve the issues, and where possible, provide support and help. While this is a model that has been working some incredible results in parts of the continent, it needs to be scaled up and it needs to be institutionalized, as it's been mentioned several times, into the governance model and into policies and into the transformation agenda. So this skill building and this opportunity creating is not only going to create jobs that are going to sponsor and help Africa develop, but is also going to help build enterprises and is going to accelerate the digitization within Africa, which Professor Sachs talked about and challenged us to think about. So COVID-19 has posed serious threats to the continent, but given that Africa has an incredibly valuable resource, which is its population of young people who are idealistic, who are big in numbers, who are creative, and who are passionate about the future of their continent. It is my belief that during this time, investing in their work, but not investing just as a way of saying that we support you, but actually providing them with the tools and networks and support mechanisms. You do that, and they'll surprise you, as they have me. So with that, I want to thank all of you for an incredible work, and SDSN Youth and the entire SDSN network is here to support you and your work, and we look forward to further collaborations. Thank you very much, everyone, and happy International Youth Day.
Thank you, Sam, for that. We have come to the end of this webinar. Despite all the technical issues, Mr. Loni has summarized greatly what needs to be done to meaningfully engage the youth of Africa. We have some resources that we're providing after this webinar. A link will be provided in the chat and will be shared to each of you via email for those of you who registered, sharing about just basically the summary of this event, the resources that SDSN Youth is providing through the SDG Academy, so that you can learn how to take action on the SDGs. We also have the SDG Zone, which is a flagship program and site by SDSN Youth, where you can actually learn about sustainable development, and it's actually been created specifically for young people. You can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter at SDSN Youth, and we look forward to engaging you in future events. Deep appreciation to our parent organization, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, led by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the Africa Leadership Institute, with their CEO, Dr. Jackie Chimanzi, the Sustainable Development Goals Center for Africa, SDG Center for Africa, led by Ms. Caroline, and finally, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, represented here by Madame Diop. We're really grateful for your support and for being part of this webinar. Thank you so much, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future.
Thank you very much, and happy
International
Day again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys.